On the second day of the new year, the boiler in our main character's apartment stopped working. He thought he might have rented a house with a boiler that was about to break soon. Then a man walked outside the apartment, mad and shouting that young people today need to learn how to save on heating. He told them to wear thick underclothes and to put bubble wrap on the windows. He also reminded them that he said not to use the boiler too much. He knew that it was the way of that mean old man to tell him ahead of time that the boiler would go out, but he also knew that if he told the old man the boiler was broken, the old man would surely blame him for everything. He knew that the old man would say he had to pay for fixes and would then say he had to raise the rent because he didn't take care of the house. And there would be other silly talk like that. He wanted to hide the nasty old man in the yard, but he didn't want to cause trouble. For him, who had lived a hard and dull life since birth, a freezing cold shower fit better than a hot shower from a working boiler. And maybe he was fooled by the words of that mean old man, because the next thing he knew, he left his tiny apartment to buy bubble wrap for the windows. He thinks it was called the butterfly effect because the flutter of a butterfly's wings can cause a storm on the other side of the world. But he didn't know back then that a small event like his boiler breaking down would change his life completely. On January 2nd, 2020, at 9 p.m., he was in the store asking a woman where to find bubble wrap, and she told him it was to the right of the big post with the letter F on it. Then he walked that way, thinking that the store had everything. As he walked, a child asked his father if he could get a tool, but the child's father asked why he would need a monkey wrench and told the child to put it down. Then the father and child kept walking, with the child amazed at the monkey wrench. Our main character's name is Lee Hwa-yoon, and according to the orphanage director, his father, who he never met, gave him that name. Hwa in his name means peaceful, and Yoon means to achieve. But with a name meaning peaceful achievement, he has lived a life that is the total opposite. Hwa-yoon was left by his parents at birth, and the orphanage did no more than give him a place to sleep and eat. But it was the place that made him want to be stronger, and he thought that money would make him powerful. So he worked hard even in high school, but his poor schooling and lack of money meant he could only get part-time jobs. One thing he learned is that even if he gave up his little time, he'd only earn small change, making him think the world is tough. He stopped at the machetes row, picked one up, and smiled, thinking it was nice and looked fun. A lady asked a man what was wrong with Hwa-yoon and why he was smiling at those machetes, but the man said he didn't know and that Hwa-yoon is giving him some creep vibes. Hwa-yoon looked at the sharp machete and thought it brought back memories. When he saw that his hard work wasn't even worth one 10,001 note, and that orphans couldn't join the army, he became a fighter, fighting in many battles and wars around the world as part of Force 1. It was a worldwide group of fighters, and Force 1 was full of orphans and those left out by people. In other words, people who had nothing to lose. People like him got a place to sleep, clothes to wear, and the hope of money till they died. He was thankful for all of it. They fought together, beating pirates at sea and taking down terrorist leaders on land. Sometimes, he would fight in global wars to make more money. The cashier told him it would be 240,000 won and asked him what he would use the machete for because usually, it's something collectors buy, and it's not very useful for things like cutting wood or camping. She asked him again if he wanted to see other machetes that might work better, but he said it was fine, and he'd take it. He had been thinking about getting a new machete as his old one was dull, and he could feel the strength in that machete just by holding it. Then he pointed to the bubble wrap and asked the lady for 10 meters of it. She agreed and started to cut it, but he saw that the cutter was dull and got mad because the blade was dull, and the lady was making a mess. So he called her over, making her confused, but he just lifted his machete and swung it in the air, making her scared. But then she saw that he just cut the bubble wrap quicker. Hwa-yoon's attention was caught by someone loudly asking what was happening and if there was a special event going on. People were gathered around, happy and taking pictures of something. But him and the other people were filled with terror when it jumped at them, holding a sharp knife. The man was about to run when it appeared behind him and cut his back with a knife. Then the man fell down dead, and the goblin started eating him. Hwa-yoon wondered what was happening and noticed that it looked like one of those goblins from games. But then the goblin looked back at him, making him step back in fear. Then it jumped at him to attack, but luckily, he cut it in half, still wondering what on earth was going on. In the Alandal Mart, they can hear something shouting in anger, and Hwa-yoon was catching his breath while green blood was dripping on his machete. He smelled an overwhelming stench of blood, but then he heard someone shouting for help. When he looked back, he saw a lot of people dead on the ground and many goblins smiling, looking at someone. The goblin ran toward the lady who was with a child and begging for God to help them. Fortunately, he jumped in time to cut the goblins in half to protect the lady with her child. The lady fearfully asked him what was going on and where those things were coming from. But he just looked at them and noticed that the machete really doesn't cut through things well. He guessed he needed to find something more useful to deal with the situation. Suddenly, he heard a lot of angry growls and saw many goblins glaring at him in anger. He lifted forward his machete, wondering why they kept coming. but then he heard someone telling the others to fight the monsters. Then the men attacked the goblins using different tools, and one of the men smashed a goblin in the head while telling it to back off. But one man was shaking in fear to the side, begging God to save him. Then he told the man that it wasn't a dream, so he'd better get his act together while handling a chainsaw, and told the man that if he wanted to live, he should get up because praying wasn't going to get him anywhere. He knew that currently, he just wanted to increase the number of people fighting that horde of goblins. Then the men proceeded to attack the goblins together. One of the goblins appeared behind the afraid man, but the man managed to cut its head in half. Wei-yun told the man that he did a good job, and the afraid man thinks knowing that even if one was physically and mentally weak, the human instinct to survive is a great force. Then one man called them and told them to come over there. Then they saw a portal. He told them that there's no mistaking it. It must be where those monsters were coming from, and they needed to get rid of that thing. One of the men asked how they could get rid of it, but he replied that he didn't know. But then a hand with sharp nails slowly came out of the portal, and the goblins smiling came out of it, making them shocked. A moment later, a lot of people were killed on the ground, and he noticed that the situation was only getting worse because the number of the goblins swarming out of the rift had not decreased one bit. Moreover, the stamina of the people fighting the goblins was steadily decreasing. So at that rate, there was no way anyone would know how to get rid of those dangerous creatures. Also, they didn't have a logical explanation for the appearance of those monsters, and the dimensional rift that the monsters were coming from would make even genius scientists gape in awe. Then he counted 5 to 1, making the man confused, and he explained there were 10 goblins in each wave and 10 minutes between each wave. Then he told them that there were currently a total of 26 goblins out there, and 10 minutes later there were going to be 10 more. He thought the problem was, even though he understood the situation fully, he couldn't think of a way to solve it, and there were limitations to the things in that store that could be used as weapons. He knew that wielding things made of heavy metal axes, crowbars, chainsaws, and hammers would use a lot of energy. In addition, they were all close combat weapons, which meant that they would need to fight those monsters up close. But he knew that one mistake, and they'd be goblin chow. Also, many of the people in the hardware store had already died, and the ones giving it their all to fight looked completely exhausted. He thought that if only he had a gun, but suddenly someone shouted fire and a missile fired. Then it hit the thing behind them, making him shocked. One of the men told them that they were the Capital Defense Command's counterterrorism response team and that they were now in safe hands. Then they told them to assist the injured near them and move toward them. The team of soldiers moved to their position, settled down, and shot the goblins who were trying to attack the people around. On the other hand, he was with a scared man, hiding from behind, and the man shakily thanked him. Then he introduced himself as Kim Bo-on, but he just told Bo-on that he was tired. Then he walked away while telling Bo-on to just go on his way. Wei-yun was sick and tired of the weak, and one thing he learned from participating in battles around the world as a mercenary is that the weak are always a heavy burden. So, he doesn't want to carry dead weight around when the situation isn't over yet. Furthermore, now that there are soldiers with guns around, he has even less of a need for a man like Bo-on. But he sighed when he noticed that the soldiers were breathing unstably and in an unstable stance. Also, they were an absolute mess, which made him angry. Then he ordered one of the soldiers to hand the gun over and introduced himself as Li Wei-yun from Force 1. But the man just asked him if he could repeat it. But he just snatched the gun and let go of his chainsaw while the captain of the soldiers asked him why he let his gun get stolen and ordered him to arrest Wei-yun while he was aiming the gun at the goblins. Then he started to hit the goblins, and every bullet hit the goblins without missing. The captain asked the soldier, shocked at what he just saw, and the man who got the gun stolen replied that Wei-yun said he was from Force 1, making the captain more shocked, knowing that Force 1 is the most ruthless mercenary company in the world. When the goblin was about to attack the people, he hit them in the head. Then he attacked the goblins while the soldiers helped the people. Then they continued moving until the people were saved. But then a system popped up in front of him, showing him that the game was restarting, making him confused. He held his head and closed his eyes in frustration, then peeked to see it again, knowing that since he stepped into the hardware store, inconceivable things have happened one after another. But he wondered if the line of text in front of him that was making his head hurt was real. But then the system was still in front of him. He didn't know what on earth that so-called game was, but the fact that it said restarting rather than starting was making his head even more of a mess. And he had never seen such hideous monsters or something like that dimensional rift before. But he knew that it wasn't just him because no one in that hardware store had seen such a scene before. But he thought it would probably be foolish to try to understand the situation because, after all, everything that happened since he stepped into that hardware store was beyond human common sense. But suddenly, he heard a loud crash from behind him, and when he looked back, he saw the sharp teeth of an orc loudly growling in anger. The soldiers immutably attacked the orc using their guns, but the bullets just hit the orc without doing anything to it. He was also attacking the orc, but he noticed that it wasn't working at all. The orc walked closer to them while they attacked it, but then someone jumped toward it, swung the axe, and slashed it behind the orc's knees. The orc collapsed on the ground while Bo-on told them that an orc's lower body is its weakness, and they can take them down easily if they can make them lose their balance. While they were stunned in shock and wondered who it was, Wei-yun knew that Bo-on was clearly a weakling less than an hour ago, and he was huddled in a corner trembling before a small goblin. But Bo-on, who had just easily defeated that orc, seemed to know everything, and the way he nonchalantly took down the orc certainly wasn't clumsy at all. The orc was easily killed by Bo-on, but then two more orcs slowly came out of the portal and growled angrily, getting their attention. But he was shocked to see the kid running toward the orcs. He remembers that it was the kid who was begging his father to buy him a monkey wrench just a couple of hours ago. Even with the knowledge of what the orc's weakness is, it's reckless to fight an orc with just that information, especially for a young boy with that small body. However, he notices that the little boy is just casually slaughtering orcs as if it isn't his first time doing so. But then he notices that it wasn't just the kid because the lady in the cashier area was simply rolling a chain in the air, and he remembers that she was the employee who cut the bubble wrap. She is displaying similar behavior and she is currently taking down orcs left and right without the slightest trace of emotion in her eyes. Then he realized that the man named Kim Bo-on, who is currently slashing at an orc body with an axe, is the same person who was praying on his knees as he was being attacked by a monster. Also, that little kid who was throwing a tantrum at his father like a regular child, and that female employee who had spoken to him in a warm and kind tone was simply attacking the orcs, making him wonder what on earth is going on. Then he heard the captain telling the soldiers to hold their fire and calling them idiots. Then behind him, he heard the people cheering that the god heard their prayers and they are saved. He wonders what is the difference between the people who suddenly changed and fought the orcs and those who didn't, and what caused their sudden change. Then a system pops up in front of him telling him that there is no tutorial in that game. However, he may ask 3 questions about the game, so he should choose his questions carefully. Our MC has a nickname, and it was given to him when he entered the world's most ruthless mercenary company and roamed the battlefields. It was Fearless, one who does not fear anything, and it's a nickname given by the foreigners in his team, as he always kept his cool and exercised calm judgment regardless of the situation. He was thankful for those traits because he was able to survive amid a chaotic battlefield full of bullets and debris. The system explained to him that the right to ask questions is given to all humans who have been selected as players, making him once again realize that it would be foolish to try to understand the entire situation and say that it wasn't even funny anymore. He doesn't doubt the messages that have appeared right before his eyes, as everything that he has witnessed is real. So he asks the system what the hell all of this is. The system replied that it was the end of the world and the system that has been designed to test human beings. Also, it's a combination of the video games they, humans, seem to like so much, but he told it that it was bullshit and it should stop that nonsense at once. But the system just told him to ask the question carefully, and if he likes, he doesn't have to ask them now. He notices that it was a mechanical voice that sounds like a female, making him annoyed. But he knows that he can just bash his way through things like goblins and monsters, but he also knows that it won't work with it, and it doesn't have a physical body and only communicates through text and voice. Then the system told him that it will add to the answer to his first question, and the status window will be open to him from that moment on. Also, there are humans who have been selected as players all over the world, and he was currently in Korea. It then told him to call out the status window. He was about to say status window his ass, but then the system showed that he was level 1 with stamina, strength, mana, agility, and concentration at 1. His bonus points at 3, and his achievements and skills unknown. He laughed to see it while thinking that the situation is starting to get interesting and the absurd system message about video games being incorporated into the world is actually true. The system told him that it was proof that he had become a player of that game and gates had appeared all around the globe. Those gates are connected to dungeons where monsters were living. He asked it if he should train himself hard and defeat the monsters so as not to let mankind perish. While thinking that once the system message mentioned video games, he roughly got the gist of the situation. Rather than listening to its spiel, he wanted to ask a more important question. It told him that he caught on quickly, but he just asked it more importantly why the kid, the employee, and the guy in the glasses suddenly became like it. But the system replied that it did not know either, and they might be natural-born players, making him sigh and telling it as if, but then the system made a broken sound because of its error, making him wonder what was wrong with it. Then the system showed that he was the only player who has not regressed, and to maintain the balance of the game, the player would receive a special skill. Then it proceeded to search for the special skill. He asked it what it meant, the only one who didn't regress, and if everyone regressed except him. To regress is to return from the future to the past, and it was a word that was familiar to him because he shouted thousands of times on the harsh battlefield about wanting to return. After reading it, everything slowly started to make sense to him, from the meaning of the words, game restarting, to the way those ordinary people slaughtered the orcs so easily. The absurd words of the system were all true, so he thought the message he just saw about how everyone had regressed except him was probably also true. He cussed in anger and asked if it even made sense. It was at that moment that he realized that everyone had regressed except him and told the system that he was going to ask another question, but the system just showed that it was currently searching for special skills. Then an old lady angrily asked him what he was doing and told him to go over there and help them fight because he was fighting pretty well just now. But he was pissed to hear it and told her that she didn't even dare to make a peep when the monsters were in front of her, so she should be quiet, making her stunned in fear. Then he asked her if she regressed too, but she just asked him back what is regress. He explained that it meant she came back to the past from the future, but she just asked him what he was talking about. But then he learned one more thing thanks to the old lady, and it was, in addition to the strange monsters that suddenly spawned in the system messages that he could now see, only those who became players had regressed. As if trying to prove that they were from the future, the players were taking down the orcs by only focusing on attacking their weak spots. So he was the only one who didn't know the future. He shook his head while thinking that it was a freaking headache and he shouldn't rush into making any judgments. Then a man approached him and asked him if he might introduce himself again. Then Boan told him that he was the reason he was able to become a player and he had been searching for him his entire life and even went from dungeon to dungeon all over Korea because he needed to meet him. But he just asked him what in confusion. Still, Boan told him that today was the turning point of his entire life and if he hadn't helped a cowardly him out and handed him a chainsaw, he wouldn't have awakened as a player and he would have just been another basement loser for the rest of his life. He noticed that clearly those were the words of someone who had been to the future. Boan happily told him that the only reason he was able to achieve some success as a player is that he had him as a role model. He asked Boan if he knew him well, and Boan excitedly replied that there isn't a single player in Korea who doesn't know him because he was Lee Wei-eun, the player who entered the final dungeon, making him shocked and confused. Hearing the final dungeon, he slowly started to get a grasp of the situation. But it was another term that he was hearing for the first time in his life. When he was about to say something to Boan, the lady and the kid ran toward them. The lady excitedly told him that she didn't know back then that one of the people who she had fought with in the beginning was him, and the kid told him that the way he looked as he entered the final dungeon, flipping his middle finger at countless reporters, was the scene he'll never forget till the day he died. He thinks those people are the ones who were fighting orcs. In other words, they were players, which also means that they had all regressed. Then Boan told him that if he didn't mind he'd like to hear about what happened in the final dungeon. But he didn't know it, but he noticed that those people were all talking about a place called the final dungeon. Then the system popped up in front of him showing him that the special skill search was completed, so he should check his status window. He checked it and was shocked to see that his special skill was called Butterfly Effect Level 1, which means to the only one who did not regress, bonus points will be awarded for actions of his that change the future. He knows exactly what the butterfly effect means, and the flutter of a butterfly's wings can ultimately cause a typhoon halfway around the world. Then he stared at it while thinking about the bonus points it said. But then they heard a crash from behind, making them look back and saw many orcs coming out of the portal. The players immediately dashed towards the orcs, and he shot the orcs, thinking that of all times, more orcs came. He thought that, apart from the appearance of the status window, one of the other changes after becoming a player is that he can see the monster's name and level above its head. He hit its head using his gun, but it just looked at them in anger like he didn't hit it. He realized that the bullets are only leaving faint scorch marks and that even firearms cannot pierce the tough skin of an orc. Also, the reason those simple close combat weapons work against the orcs when guns don't is because the people using them are regressors, and those players know exactly where the weak spots of the orcs are, so they are targeting their joints, which are relatively weaker. He didn't aim at the orcs' joints with his gun as the size of the bullets is too small in relation to the size of the orcs, and even if the bullets could pierce through their joints, the damage wouldn't be enough to make the orcs fall over. Then he was about to pick up the chainsaw from the ground while thinking that the power of regression is amazing. But then he lifted his eyes up and saw an axe a little bit away from him, so he grabbed it instead. Then the system showed him that the special skill, Butterfly Effect, was activated, and he had changed the future, so he got bonus points +1. He was confused and wondered how he changed the future, so he put down the axe again and grabbed the electric drill. Then the system showed him that he had changed the future again, so he gained bonus points +1. But suddenly, an orc appeared behind him, and he powerfully threw the axe toward it, hitting its knees hard and making it fall to the ground hard. Then he immediately ran towards it, grabbed the axe, lifted it in the air, and chopped the orc's head off. Then he asked Boan if he was using an axe in that situation last time, and Boan replied that from what he remembers, he used a chainsaw. He smiled because he got it now, and if he does something different from what happened in the past, that will be like changing the future. He was not completely sure, but it made sense, and he thinks what he should do now is the opposite of what he did in his previous life. A moment later, Bo-on told him that in the past, he killed 3 orcs by himself, but he just asked Bo-on how he killed 3 of them by himself. Bo-on pointed to something while telling him that he used it. He looked in the direction Bo-on was pointing and saw thinner. He knows that it was a chemical that can make hardened paint usable again, and it is highly flammable, making him say that it was surely interesting. He walked closer to Thinner while thinking that he used the thinner to burn the orcs to death, and he was having the same idea as him in the past. Then he grabbed the thinner, knowing that it means if he kills the orcs with something other than thinner, he'd be doing something different. Alternatively, he can use thinner to kill all of them or just not kill any at all. The system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained a bonus point +1. Having already used up a lot of energy, the players agreed to his plan, and after hurting the orcs by either destroying their Achilles tendons or knee joints, he went around and poured thinner on the fallen orcs. Then he set them on fire. When the orcs were being burned, the system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained bonus points +1, and he leveled up, so he gained bonus points +3. He now understands that when he does the opposite of what he did in the past, he will be given bonus points, and although he still doesn't know what those bonus points are for, it was only natural. He also thinks that even without adding bonus points to his stats, he can still chop off the orcs' heads easily. The system showed him that he achieved the Brave Rookie and explained that the achievement is awarded to players who complete a hunt without using any bonus points. Also, a skill will be awarded for earning that achievement, so he gained armor level 1, making him confused. But then, a bright light wrapped around him and gave him black gloves. He looked at it and asked what it was. The man cursed because he thought it would be his that time, and the lady angrily asked when did he even get that skill. He asked them what with those faces and if there was a problem that he got that skill. The lady replied that there was, of course, a problem because he devoured all of Korea with that overpowered skill. And the man told him that he can't believe he just missed the chance of getting that insane skill, making him realize that he must have gotten that skill in his past as well. He also thinks that it should be the case as the butterfly effect skill was not activated and the future only changes if he does something new. But the skill wasn't activated when he got the Brave Rookie achievement and the armor skill. But then the portal released a powerful power and rumbled loudly. He stepped forward to it while the players were looking at him and Bo-on seriously glaring at him. He stopped walking when the system popped up in front of him and told him that it was a dungeon of goblins and orcs with 11 goblins and 8 orcs. Also, the max number of players is 4 and it was dungeon difficulty D-. He thinks that the game was definitely first created with the annihilation of the human race in mind, and there is a fixed number of monsters in each dungeon. After a certain period of time, the monsters in the dungeon would come out of the dungeon gate and destroy everything. He also notices that those monster-filled dungeons are connected to Earth via gates, so there is only one way to destroy a gate. Then he told them that they have to kill all the monsters as quickly as possible because the number of monsters in the dungeon and the maximum number of players that can enter it is stated on the dungeon information. But he knows that the dungeon's difficulty is important as it determines the rarity of skills and items that can be dropped. Then he told them that its difficulty is D-, which means it was a dungeon above rare grade, and he thinks even so, he still has a reason for wanting to enter that dungeon because he wants to do an experiment. He wants to test out the stats he has gained as a player and the newly acquired skill, armor. He knows that he was at a disadvantage with regard to information about the world, so he needs power that he can immediately see. After all, strength is actual power. Also, the armor means it strengthens and hardens the player's body, and the toughness of the armor is in proportion to the player's strength with bonus points of 15. This makes him realize that those bonus points are the points he got from the butterfly effect. Then he told the system to apply all his bonus points to strength, then proceeded to walk toward the dungeon while thinking that he has already defeated countless goblins and knows the weakness of the orcs, so he needs to be prepared for unknown dangers. That's why he chose that place as his first hunting ground while Bo-on behind him thought that perhaps Wei-yun got something from there in his previous life. Then they entered the dungeon and started to walk while looking around without noticing a goblin smilingly hiding from their side. They were shocked when goblins appeared behind them. One of them bit his arm, but it was shocked that it couldn't bite him. The system showed him that his armor was activated while the goblin looked at him in shock. Then he reached for the goblin and grabbed its head, then he squeezed it to death. The system showed that he has changed the future, so he gained bonus points +1 and showed him that he was level 2 with 16 strengths, and his skills are butterfly effect level 1 and armor level 1. He noticed that his strength is at 16 when it hasn't been 5 hours since the game began. Then he threw the goblin on the ground, making the lady fearfully say that it was ridiculous and the man can't believe that he crushed the goblin's skull with just one hand. Bo-on asked him just how he did it and told him that the skill armor is the only one of its kind in the world. It was probably because of that skill that he was considered the strongest player in Korea in his previous life. But he just asked Bo-on, so what? Bo-on replied that he'll be taking it. Then Bo-on snatched the chainsaw from the man and launched it toward him, making him surprised. Then Bo-on attacked him with the chainsaw, but the chainsaw didn't pierce through him, making him laugh and think that even if he didn't regress, it wasn't right. Absolutely not. Then he lifted his hand, knowing that it was his turn. He simply grabbed the working chainsaw and snapped it into two. Then he threw it to the side and grabbed Bo-on by the neck. He lifted Kim Bo-on, who was level 3, with one hand, and Bo-on was surprised. But he just told him that it was a shame while thinking that at the end of greed lies destruction. He learned it himself on the battlefield and has a wound to remind him about it. Also, he knows that as those players have regressed to the hardware store at the same time he awakened, they must have thought that they would be able to get the skills he had in his previous life. Then he asked others if they want to try too and told them to get lost. Then he tightened his grip on Bo-on's neck and snapped Bo-on's neck. He looked at the dead Bo-on the ground and remembered that on the battlefield, what he received in return for releasing his enemies was not gratitude, but more bullets, and that is how it always was. Then he told them that the law is meaningless now that the game has started and told them to get lost if they don't want to die. He was well aware that he should never let emotions get in the way when dealing with an enemy who has threatened his life even once. He thinks it was an extremely cruel game because the inventory window would appear above the corpse of a dead player so others can help themselves to the deceased's items, but he says that it was convenient. Then he grabs the necklace of the Goblin Champion that has strength +3 and agility +3. He wears it while telling it that he has a new owner, and the system shows him that he has changed the future, so he gains bonus points +1. He thinks the strength +3 and agility +3 he gained from Kim Bo-on's item is quite a lot because he gains 3 bonus points when he levels up by 1 level. So the necklace of the Goblin Champion is like leveling up by 2 levels, and even though its effect will become more minor as his level goes up, it was a very good item in the beginning. The man asks him why he is wearing that necklace when it looks so tacky, but he just picks up the chainsaw on the ground while the orc runs toward him and puts it inside the orc's mouth. Then he swings the chainsaw to cut the orc's face in half and says that he can't really feel the difference. He knows that even though his strength is 16, a +3 boost is not small. However, he can't really feel the effects of the item. A moment later, the system pops up, showing him that all the monsters in the dungeon have been killed, so the dungeon will be destroyed, and they will have 3 minutes to escape there. He walks toward the exit, leaving the goblins and orcs dead on the ground, knowing that the only way to destroy a gate is to enter it and kill all the monsters in the dungeon. When all the monsters die, the gate that made a rift in time and space will go away without a trace, and that's what he means when he says the law is meaningless now. Even the regressed players have no information about what happens to those who don't make it out of the gate before it goes away. But he thinks that after all, none of the people who were still inside ever came back after the gate was gone because it was as if the dungeons were aiding. Once a gate is gone, there's no way to know who killed whom or who died in the dungeon. It's because the bodies of the victims will go away with the gate. He looks at Bo-on's dead body and guesses that perhaps it was the reason why the dungeons gave players time to get away before they were destroyed. Then he notices the kid who was throwing a tantrum at his father. He asks the kid why he was there and if he wants to die there, but the kid replies no and tells him that he wants to be with him. He tells the kid he can't and that they should go through that gate. But the kid cries and begs him to let him come with him. He just tells the kid to stop it. Then he opens his status window and puts his bonus points to his strength, so his current strength is 25 +3. He knows that with the boost from the necklace of the Goblin Champion, his strength is at 28, and his strength stats are higher than a level 9 player who puts all of their stats into strength. He angrily tells the kid to stop it while the kid is crying, and the kid tells him that they have gone back 10 years in the past. He just tells the kid to stop crying and to be brave. Then the kid yells at him that even after 10 years from now, his life will still be the same. So he wants to be a hero at least once in his life too. That is the reason why he was asking him. But the kid makes it clear that it was his wish to become the right-hand man of a hero, but he just tells the kid that he is an interesting one. He knows that the kid's name is Kim Minsu, and the only thing that interests him about the kid is that he has regressed from 10 years in the future. In other words, he knows the future of the next 10 years. Minsu seriously told him that he wants to change that insignificant life of his and begged him to help him, then swore to him that he'll make sure not to bring disgrace to the name, Lee Wei-yoon. He thinks when Minsu regressed, he thought it was his chance to turn his life around. However, Minsu realized that it wasn't just him because everyone else has also regressed. So in other words, the regression was meaningless, and that minor player who has been killing monsters and destroying dragons for 10 years has now decided that life as the sidekick of Korea's hero, Lee Wei-yoon, would be better. The way he sees it, Minsu has made a very wise decision, and Minsu has a good head on his shoulders. They walk outside of the dungeon while he was asking Minsu if his final goal isn't to be someone else's sidekick, and Minsu replied that he wants to be second in command and he was the number one, the boss, so he was the one in charge. He told Minsu that he'll need to know if he can be useful and that 10 people who will be involved with him in the future names, faces, and levels, friends, or enemies, it doesn't matter, and ordered Minsu to get him their information. Then he seriously told Minsu that if he pulls any tricks, he was dead, to which Minsu replied that he understood, and he told Minsu to call him when he was done. Then they exchanged phone numbers, and after that, Minsu happily ran out of the store. He smiled and thinks Minsu was an interesting one. 3 days later, he realized that it has been 3 days since the regression of players all over the world, and at first, the players tried to hide the fact that they have regressed from the future. He knows that there are many reasons for it. For one is they did not want to be regarded as lunatics even though monsters that are trying to destroy the world have appeared on Earth. But time travel was still a little too much for people to come to terms with. Also, the regressors wanted to live a life that was different from their previous lives. As such, they were unwilling to share the information they had about the future with others, and they all thought regression was their golden opportunity to turn their lives around, like how the protagonist of a novel would. However, the fact that every single player had regressed made becoming the protagonist very difficult. But thanks to it, both the media and online platforms are bombarded with stories about the game. He was watching TV when the system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained bonus points +1. The reporter named Young Moon-young told the viewers that a cataclysm has occurred. The world has turned into a game, and with that cataclysm, all of the players have regressed. So he was there today to talk about that matter, and they have Mr. Lee Dong-guk, the director of the Asia-Pacific branch of the World Player Association. Moon-young told Dong-guk that many people are in a state of confusion right now, and in particular, those who did not awaken as players in the first place are having a hard time understanding that phenomenon. So he asked Dong-guk if he could break it down for them. Dong-guk replied to the regular people who are not players, it was actually good news because the fact that the players who protected them from monsters have regressed from the future means that they can become stronger even faster. And under the protection of the players who have become stronger, they will be able to live life as per normal, so in his opinion, there is nothing to be concerned about because they just have to watch out for players who might make financial demands in exchange for information about the future. But otherwise, there are no major issues. Moon-young told the viewers that in other words, it was a good thing for mankind as players can become stronger, but he asked Dong-guk why that is happening, how did the players regress, and if something happens inside the final dungeon. He thinks about the final dungeon when he hears it and heard Dong-guk reply that many people are asking if the players have regressed because something happened in the final dungeon. But to a certain extent, it was a reasonable question, and in fact, the time of the players' regression was 3 hours after the 21 players who were chosen from all over the world entered the final dungeon, making him realize that it means in 10 years later, the final dungeon appears and 3 hours after 21 people entered it, all the players regressed. Moon-young told the viewers that the final dungeon could be the end of that game, making him wonder what exactly happened in there. Then he told the viewers that they were coming back after the break, but Wei-yoon just called them filthy bastards. Then he smiled while thinking about the strongest player. Listening to Moon-young and Dong-guk's conversation, he finally figured out the reason why the players in the hardware store called him by that childish title, Hero. The system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained bonus points, +1, making him realize that it must be because of the bubble wrap on his window. He guessed he didn't even tape bubble wrap to his windows for the winter in his past life. Then he figured out that every action he was taking gave him bonus points, and perhaps he wasn't at home at that time in his past life, so he got a bonus point for just drinking water and another one for sitting on the couch. Also, if he wants to be dramatic, he was gaining bonus points so quickly that he couldn't even catch his breath. He currently has 37 bonus points, and just looking at it, he has accumulated puts him in a good mood. But he was curious how he was able to become Korea's strongest player and enter the final dungeon when he didn't have that totally overpowered butterfly effect skill in his previous life. The emotion behind him wanting to know is not curiosity, but it's ambition. He has learned as a child that the weak had to surrender to the strong. In other words, he has personally experienced that there is a reason why he must become strong. So he chose money as his means to become strong and put his life on the line on the battlefield to raise his value. Even in a world where there was no concept of an absolute person, he dreamt of becoming one. But now, the title of the Absolute One has actually been created in that world. Then he heard the host on the TV counting down and pointing to the statues while telling the viewers that those are the statues of the players named Lee Wei-eun, Park Moo-sung, and Choi Chul-sung, who are the ones who entered the final dungeon as Korea's representatives. He was stunned like a stone to hear it, but he noticed that the statue named Lee Wei-eun looked exactly like him. He knows that those statues have been made in just 3 days after the regression of the players, and it's making him realize that he really was an incredible player in his previous life. Also, he knows that among the mercenaries, he was the one with the highest fees, but it didn't change anything because he was just another consumable item on the battlefield. But it didn't bother him because he was only there for the money. But at that moment, he could see himself being idolized. The reporter told the viewer that the fact that all the other players regressed after the representative of each county entered the final dungeon suggests that something must have happened inside, and asked if they shouldn't hear from the 3 Korean players who were Lee Wei-eun, Park Moo-sung, and Choi Chul-sung about what happened in there because they were there, so they should know. But he replied that he would like to know too. Donguk told Moon-young that all 3 of them have gone into hiding, making Moon-young ask Donguk if he was saying that the people who should be treated as heroes have disappeared. Donguk replied yes and explained that those are the people who went into the final dungeon at the end of the game. In other words, they are the strongest players in Korea, and when they entered the final dungeon, they were basically fully equipped with unique items and skills, which means they have regressed to the present, and they are the only ones who know the locations of those unique and legendary grade items and skills. Moon-young asks Donguk if he was saying that they have gone into hiding for their own protection, and Donguk replied that it was right. And the problem is that the other players also want those items and skills for themselves because they are all overpowered items and skills after all. Moon-young asks Donguk if it was true that there's a new regulation from the World Players Association, and Donguk replies yes, then explained that the players who entered the final dungeon in their previous lives will be pardoned for any acts of crime committed. Moon-young was shocked to hear it and asked Donguk how there could be such a regulation. Donguk explained that players are required to abide by the higher level laws enacted by the constitutions of their respective countries, and that regulation was enacted by the World Players Association. So one provision has been added to the law, and the reason for it was, but then he turns off the television before Donguk can finish explaining. He knows that there are 2 facts. First, there are many people after him, and second, it's legal for him to beat them to a pulp. A moment later, he was running to the street while wearing a hood, a cap, and a mask, thinking that no matter how much he thinks about it, he wouldn't have gone to Gwanghwamun Square in his previous life. Since going to Gwanghwamun Square is something he did not do in his past life, he was changing the future just by walking there. As if to prove it, the system notifications keep popping up with every step he takes. He continues to run while the system shows him that he changed the future continuously, and his status window. Then he dashes while he puts his points to his agility, so his current agility is 52 plus 3. Then he jumped, knowing that general common sense players abided by when applying bonus points, such as how strength is the best stat to invest in early in the game, or how players who use mana consuming skills should quickly increase their mana, has nothing to do with him. The speed at which he earns bonus points is completely different from that of normal players, but of course, he knows that it wasn't right to apply the notion of general standards on him in the first place. Then he jumped off the building, knowing that it was the way. Then he dashed to the ground but managed to land on the ground in the right position, breaking the ground in the process. Then he stood up to proceed to walk casually again. He walks toward the swarm of people and looked at his statue, making him say that it was nuts and he can't believe it. He thinks if it was really that big of a deal to be chosen to go into the final dungeon as they said on television. He thought everyone would recognize him. That is why he came prepared, because he doesn't want to attract unnecessary attention. What he needs now is information about his future. Then he remembers that when he was a mercenary, he used to appear on television to increase his value, but now is not the time for it. He knows that everyone's all thinking the same thing, and the players that have regressed can't hide their ambition from him. He knows they are all aiming for him, as they believe that he has a lot of information. But he doesn't have any because he didn't regress. Those players don't know it and are all under a huge illusion. They also don't know that he has a new power that he didn't have in his past life, like Kim Bo-won, who died in that first dungeon. In any case, it is clear that he is now the target of the players who are blinded by ambition and greed. He looked around and called the regressor players bastards because he noticed that the players in the square were all armed and probably holding weapons they can just sort in their inventory to gain attention. Also, having gained the title of hero who will save Earth from the monsters, the players are now famous. If he showed his face to those guys, that place would erupt in chaos, and he was looking for a different type of player. When he saw the broadcast of that place on television, he saw a cult-like scene of people bowing and praying in front of those 3 statues. He felt like those people were treating him like a deity, and they must be doing that because they know something about him, even if the stories have been beautified or exaggerated. It was the reason why he was there, but unlike what he saw on television, they are nowhere to be found. Then he looked at the Poison King Choi Chul-sung statue, with the caption "They are there to save mankind," and thanked the people for their support all that time. Then to Sword Emperor Park Musung with a caption of "They will go in there to end the game once and for all." Then he looked at his statue without a caption, but he was called a Shadow of Death. He shakes his head while wondering what the Shadow of Death means. Suddenly, someone breaks his statue's head, making him confused. Then he saw a man smiling and getting down in front of him while his statue's head collapsed behind him. Then the man put his weapon back into his inventory, then they stared at each other. The man faced him and quickly ran away, but he knew that now his agility stat was over 50, so it was not as easy for him to control as it was before. Then he dashed toward the man and ran to follow the man. A minute later, he reached the man's neck and lifted the man up using one hand while asking the man if he knew him. When the man didn't reply, he realized that the man did know him and asked the man where he was running off to. The man opened his inventory to try to grab his weapon, but he grabbed the man's hand while telling him that it was a nice try. Then he pulled the man's weapon while saying he would be taking it off his hand. It was the mace of the Orc champion with a 25% chance of stunning the opponent's attack plus 30 and strength plus 10. Then he asked the man what his affiliation was while guessing that the man must be in a guild because he knew that it was impossible for a person to get a rare weapon on his own in just 5 days. Then he squeezed the man's neck harder while asking him if he didn't see the interview on the television. He reminded the man that it was the one with the director of the World Players Association's words, so he would kill him if he tried to pull some trick on him. But the man just laughingly called him a bastard and told him to let him go. He seriously told the man that it looked like he was 10 seconds away from dying and ordered the man to tell his name and his affiliation. The man fearfully introduced himself as Kim Changbi from the General Guild, and he told Changbi to continue. With that, Changbi began spilling the beans, and according to Changbi, Project Lee Wei-yun is the General Guild's plan to collect all skills and items he acquired in his previous life. He asked Changbi what the first one was and told him that if he didn't want to die, he should tell him everything. Changbi fearfully replied that it was the stealth skill and begged him not to kill him, then told him that 3 days later, at the gate to the Lycan dungeon, and explained that the Lycan dungeon is where he got the rare skill stealth in his previous life and it will be open in 3 days. He asked Changbi how did their guild know all of it, making Changbi wonder why Wei-yun was asking him what he already knew and replied that he didn't know how they got the information. But it was all true and he knew it too because it was a skill of his after all. But he just asked Changbi how they were planning to steal the skill he had. And Changbi replied that 3 days before the dungeon, 100 players would be on standby because they were sure that he would come to look for the skill he had in his previous life. He knew that 100 players who have regressed from the future were not going to be easy while the system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained a bonus point +1. A moment later, Kim Minsu arrived. Minsu told him that Changbi, the punk, was full of lies and asked him if he could just kill him, but he just told Minsu that they should see how great his information was and he would decide after hearing it. Minsu asked him if he knew that skill he had in his previous life called skill and told him that the punks from the General Guild were aiming for it right now, making Changbi sigh. The system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained bonus points while he was smiling and told them that one of them was lying. Knowing that Kim Changbi and Minsu both had information about the same thing, so all he had to do was compare what they said. Changbi, shouting, told him that it was all happening tomorrow and it was when the Lycan dungeon would be open. But he just asked Changbi what the meaning of it was. Then Changbi pointed to Minsu while telling him that Minsu, the bastard, was lying, making Minsu ask Changbi if he was crazy, but Changbi just called Minsu a scummy little midget and asked if he was scamming others already. While the two were arguing, he walked closer to them, reached them, and lifted them up easily. He told them to prove themselves one at a time and to prove that they were the ones who were telling the truth. Minsu grabbed something from his pocket and immediately showed his cell phone to Wei-yun. Wei-yun read the news, asking if he would appear at the Lycan dungeon on the 7th of January, and he knew that it was tomorrow, which Minsu nodded in agreement to. Then Minsu read to him that the Lycan dungeon is a dungeon that appeared in the early days of the game, and due to the nature of the Lycans, it was hard for new players to beat them. This was because their attack speed was way beyond that of the goblins and orcs. Also, on top of it, they moved in packs, so because of it, no one could defeat them at first, and the Lycan dungeon was left alone. As a result, the lichens inside poured out of the gate. Then Minsu told him that the lichens dungeon was well known among players, as the lichens completely destroyed the cities nearby. He told Minsu that, in other words, everyone knew where that dungeon was. Dungeons and gates were not a worry for those who did not become players, and at the start of the game, they did get a lot of looks as they were something totally not real. However, interest in them went away as time went on. This was because every time a gate opened, people would get a text message to leave the place, or soldiers would show up to block the whole area. So the only thing normal people had to do was get out of the way. When players got used to the game, people went back to their usual daily lives. But the gate of the Lichen dungeon was not the same. It was the gate where monsters came out of and meanly destroyed the cities nearby in the early part of the game. So now, everyone is wanting a strong player to come soon to deal with the lichens. That's why even regular people know about the place of the gate, and the monsters in that dungeon are lichens. Then Minsu loudly told him that he was the one who destroyed the lichen dungeon in the past. He jokingly asked Changbi if Minsu was right and said that he would ask him one last thing. Then he asked Changbi, who told him to break his statue with that mace, but Changbi just loudly called him a bastard. So he squeezed Changbi's neck and snapped it. He let go of dead Changbi and Minsu while the system showed him that he had changed the future. So he got bonus points, +1, making him see that he didn't kill Changbi in his earlier life. He figured out that the Lichen dungeon was opening on the 7th of January, which was tomorrow. But in his past life, there was no one who could break the gate when it opened. In other words, there wasn't a player strong enough to do it. But now that all the players have gone back, things are different. Then he told Minsu that there might be some kind of drug that can kill the lichens, just like how rat poison kills them. And he needs to know about the dungeon, but Minsu just asked him why he kept wanting to know about places he had been to in his past life and if he shouldn't know it best. He answered that it was because he didn't go back and told Minsu to be quiet and not to ask anymore. Minsu sighed with no hope and told him that what was more important than knowing about the dungeon was his level. This was because lichens were level 5 monsters, and he couldn't go into the dungeon if he was below level 5, making him shocked and asking if he really needed to be at level 5. But he knows that levels are meaningless when it comes to him. Then he opened his status window and noticed that he has a total of 80 stats points in effect, including the 162 points, so it was 242. Then his 3 bonus points are rewarded for every 1 level he gained, and 242 divided by 3 is around 80. So his stats are currently similar to a level 80 player. But Minsu told him that even if it was him, defeating the lichens will be difficult at his current level. And besides, he has the other players to deal with too. He realized that his level is the issue, knowing that even with his high stats, he won't be able to enter the dungeon because his actual level is lower than the lichens. Then he orders Minsu to take him to a place where he can level up right away, but Minsu told him that currently, only the goblin and orc gate is active, and the gates with the new monsters will only gradually open over time, like the lichen gate that is opening tomorrow because it was only 4 days since they started playing the game after all. He asks Minsu if he heard right when he says goblin and orcs. Minsu replied yes and told him that he'd usually ignore them because monsters like orcs and goblins. Then he continued by saying that they are cuties. A moment later, the system showed him that he has applied his bonus points to his strength, so his strength is currently 187 plus 3 while he was looking at his armor. Then he asked Minsu if someone broke through his armor before in his previous life, but Minsu replied that he doesn't know either as they weren't always together. But there is one thing he can tell him, that the nickname on his statue, the Shadow of Death, was given because of his armor skill. He told Minsu that the Shadow of Death nickname is really childish. Then they proceeded to head toward the goblins, and by increasing his strength stat, he didn't just strengthen his physical strength, but also greatly increased the toughness of his armor and his agility, which is currently 52 plus 3. Then he simply squeezed the goblin on the ground by just pushing it, and he knows that with his strength and agility stats, those goblins and orcs don't stand a chance. When he was done killing the goblins, he told Minsu that he saw it on the internet, but asked what exactly is a skill stone because he heard that if they swallow that stone or something, they'll get a skill. Minsu acted like thinking about it, but he was actually wondering if Wen Yun doesn't even know a concept that even non-players knew, and if Wen Yun really does not regress like the rest of them. But he noticed that Wen Yun was too strong to not have regressed. Wen Yun shouted, telling him to just answer the question, making him jump a little in shock, and replied that a skill stone is literally a stone that has a skill in it and it's located near the monster's hearts. Minsu also explained to Wen Yun that skill stones are the size of about half a human's fist, and the color of the skill stone's subtle glow indicates the skill's class. White is common, purple is rare, yellow is unique, and red is legendary, and stealth, which is assumed to be in the Lichen dungeon, is a rare class skill because its skill stone will have a purple glow. He asked Minsu what the different classes signify. Minsu replied that there are various things, but basically, the different classes indicate how many of its kinds there are on Earth, and for skills that are rare class and below, there is more than one of each. Then Minsu gave him an example like there are a few of the rare class stealth skill stones around the world, so even if he got the one in the Lichen dungeon, there would be other players elsewhere in the world who have it too. He asks Minsu if it means there is only one of each unique and legendary class skill. Minsu replied yes and told him that in addition, skills have levels too, so the higher the level, the more powerful it was, and there may be different effects gained too. Then he asked Minsu what about special skills, but Minsu was confused to hear it and asked him back what those were, but he just asked Minsu if he doesn't know what special skills are. The system showed his butterfly effect level 1 special skill while Minsu was genuinely unaware of it and trying to think about it, so he just told Minsu to never mind it. The next day, they walked somewhere and hid behind the house. Minsu asked Weiyun, who was now level, what their plan was, and he replied that he would take care of things himself. He said that he should go over there and see what they were up to, then let him know if there was anything peculiar. Minsu excitedly nodded in agreement and started to walk toward the people, while noticing that Minsu was brimming with loyalty. Then he looked around, knowing that it was where the Lichen Gate was going to appear, and looking at it, he guessed Changbi wasn't lying entirely because there were 100 players from the General Guild waiting for him. His first step was to enter the gate immediately the moment it appeared, because only a fixed number of players were allowed to enter the dungeons that appeared on Earth, and the number was different for each one. He remembered that according to Minsu, a maximum of 5 players could enter the Lichen dungeon, so he needed to get in before the 5-player limit was maxed out. Also, he knew that if he couldn't even get in, those people would kill the Lichens and take the skilled stone for themselves. Then he looked at his watch and saw that he had 7 more minutes. But then someone shouted to everyone that it was the place where Li Weiyun obtained the rare class skill, Stealth, in their previous life, and the gate would appear in 5 more minutes. So that day was the day their General Guild took the stage, and they would use Li Weiyun's stepping stone to leave an even bigger and more impactful mark on history than he did. The players cheered excitedly and shouted that it was theirs now. Then the man told everyone that until now, Weiyun had yet to appear, so they should not let their guard down because they didn't know when he would show up. But he just laughed while thinking that he was already right there, and looking at the system showing him that the gate would appear in 30 seconds. The Lichens were 25, and it was a B dungeon difficulty. The players excitedly counted down the remaining seconds, and when they hit the 1 second, the gate appeared in front of them, dealing a powerful power and loud rumble sound. One of the players told everyone that they should go for their new history. Then the men who were going inside excitedly told the others that they would be back, because things like Lichens were a piece of cake for them regressors. But then he dashed toward the gate that had the 5 men, but then the people saw that it was him and shouted to attack him. But he knew that it had been 5 days since the players regressed, so at that point there shouldn't be anyone on that planet with the agility of more than 50. But he had smashed that common sense to the ground and easily and speedily avoided the players who were trying to attack and block him. Then he entered the dungeon while the men were trying to catch him, but the system told the men that the player limit was met, so their entry was denied, leaving Minsu, who was in the crowd, amazed. On the other hand, the 4 players were shocked to see him, but the fact that all of them had regressed was convenient for him. It meant they all knew who he was and what he was like without him having to say anything. Then he teasingly told them that they were right, he was Li Weiyun. The 4 players immediately opened their inventory, grabbed something inside it, then attacked him with the whip of the goblin chief. It had weak attack power but allowed the wielder to hold dominion over the goblins, and it had an attack +1. The whips wrapped around his hands and neck, then the 3 players pulled them while one of them was busy searching his inventory. Then the man slowly got the net out of his inventory. He was confused to see it and thought that they must have decided earlier that they would be no match for him right now. They decided to tie him up since their attacks won't work. But he just smiled while noticing that looking at how they had planned all of it means they were working hard. A moment later, the players were the ones who were tied up and locked up in the net while he was teasingly telling them that it was a good attempt. But their plan still failed. But then he heard a lichen growling and walking toward them. He stood up and saw a pack of lichens growling toward them, making him wonder why they were all so angry and if it was a trait of theirs. Then he asked the players if they wanted to be Wolf Chow, making the players beg him to spare them. They explained that they were just doing as they were told, then continuously apologized to him, but he just asked them who made them do it. But then the lichens growled more loudly and jumped toward him to attack him. The players fearfully saw that he was trapped, and the lichens got him, making them think that it was how they were going to die. The lichens were busy attacking him together, but then one of the lichens flinched in fear, and he simply punched them using one hand, making them all thrown away at the same time while the system showed him that he had changed the future. So, he gained bonus points +1. He simply looked at them emotionless while the system continuously popped up, which made the players shocked and asked how it was possible. He replied that it was something he learned in the past, and it seems like it applied to those lichens too. He knew that like wolves, dogs have protruding muzzles that include their nose and mouth, and the forms of the two animals are very similar. So when he grabbed the muzzle of a dog and held its mouth shut, it deemed him to be stronger than it is. It was something he learned a few years ago when he was on a mission to track down pirates who were transporting drugs. After getting bitten by a detection dog, he grabbed its muzzle with one hand and stared right into its eyes. Because of it, that dog never bit him again since then. He spared the dog back then, but what he was dealing with there were monsters, so he had to put more strength in his grip and crush their muzzles to smithereens. The players wondered how he did it and how his physical strength was so strong. The players knew that, unlike goblins and orcs, lichens have strong bones, and having regressed, they knew exactly how huge the difference in physical ability between a level 2 orc and a level 5 lichen was. So they also knew that Weiyun's power was way beyond their imagination. One of the players shouted, asking him why he isn't killing all the lichens. He replied that he doesn't want the gate to disappear yet. He knows that when all the monsters die, the dungeon is destroyed, and the gate that appeared on Earth will also go away. He plans to leave the dungeon after finding the lichen with the skilled stone. After all, there are all those players from the general guild waiting outside for him. If the gate disappeared, they would know that he had killed all the lichens and got the skill stone. Then they would make a fuss about wanting to find him. So, to avoid that noise, he won't kill all the lichens, so he can just slip out of the gate without a sound. The lichens once again jumped toward him to attack him, but he just simply said that it wouldn't be enough. So he speedily disappeared and took down the 3 lichens with one hit. Then he seriously looked at the players while the lichens whined while falling around him and told them that it was their turn now. After the game began, rifts in time and space occurred all over the earth, and monsters poured out from those rifts, causing enormous damage to society. Everyone knew it was the end of mankind, but to fight that destruction, a game system was incorporated into the earth. The only way to stop the apocalypse was to kill all the monsters inside the dungeons. But apart from a few fanatics, no one believed in religion anymore. They knew that there was no way that God or Buddha would send monsters that only appeared in games to Earth. And when everyone was still in a state of confusion, the ones that captured their hearts were the player guilds. They didn't just have fans, and even the believers began to put their faith in them. So with it, those guilds continued to expand and become stronger. Then they began to fight to occupy the dungeons. Monster byproducts could be used as materials or renewable energy and even made into weapons that players could use in dungeons. Also, the skill stones from the dungeons could be traded for huge amounts of money among the players. In other words, occupying a dungeon was something that could generate huge profits. And not only was it excellent from a business standpoint, but eliminating those gates that caused enormous damage to the earth made them heroes to the public. That meant a guild was both a business and a religion. Then he asked the players who their leader was, and one of the players fearfully replied that it was Choi Chulsung. He was shocked to hear it because he knew that name, and it was the name of the statue that stood next to him. Then he asked the players if that guy told them to come to get the stealth skill. One of the players replied yes and explained that they were just following his instruction, making his comrade ask him why he was telling him everything and calling him a traitor. He was angry to hear it, so he crouched down to the man and tightly squeezed the man's shoulder, making the man shout in pain. The system showed him that he had changed the future, so he gained bonus points +1 while he was telling the man that he was not there to joke around with them. Then he stood up, realizing that Choi Chulsung was the guild master of the general guild. Then he asked them if Chulsung wasn't one of those who went into the final dungeon with him because he remembered that the 3 statues in Gwangwon Square were modeled after the 3 players who were selected as representatives of Korea to enter the final dungeon, and Chulsung was a comrade who went to take down the dungeon with him. But then he told himself that he couldn't quite call Chulsung a comrade because after all, he had never met him before. And in any case, he figured out that someone he had fought together with was now trying to steal his skills after regressing. But he said that it was understandable because it was just human nature, so he was not offended at all because he had long known that striving for personal benefit is what drives the world. But then he heard lichens growl again and noticed that after some of the lichens died, new ones had spawned, and the number of monsters in a dungeon was always the same. He knew that as it was a dungeon, it meant to have 25 lichens, so new ones would respawn at regular time intervals to meet that number. And he was glad that those new lichens had spawned at the perfect time because he wouldn't have to get his hands dirty now. Then he grabbed the net that trapped the players while telling Chulsung that he hoped he'd understand that he had to kill his men, making the players beg him. But he just threw the players away, so the lichens chased after them. A moment later, the men could enter the dungeon again, but they were shocked to see a head on the ground. He knew that the dungeon had a maximum player limit of 5, and when those 4 died, the gate reopened, allowing new players to enter. When the new 4 players appeared, he simply told them that he'd forgotten about it while the system showed him that he currently had 93 bonus points. As before, the new players straight away jumped to capture him. But in the end, they were the ones who were trapped inside the net and were tied up. He asked them which was the lichen with the skilled stone, and the man fearfully replied that it was the one with white brows. He seriously praised the man, noticing that those players were different from the first batch because they were answering his questions without any hesitation, making him think that perhaps the lichens that were rolling on the floor in pain with their crushed snouts and limbs along with the bodies of their comrades had taught them precisely how to behave toward him. Then he notices the wolf-like beast that had one with white brows, making it whine in fear, but he just puts his hand to it and rips it open like paper, making the players gasp in shock. He looks inside its body while saying that it was gross and thinks that he should train Minsu into a professional monster butcher to do it for him. But then he finds the stealth level 1 that makes the player's body see through, and the length of the effect is tied to the player's energy. The player man says it was a skill used by a hero who went into the last dungeon, and the girl player told them that she could have sold that skill stone for a lot of money, or used it herself to make her better as a player, but it still went back to its first owner in the end. He knows that he could get rich quick if he sells it. Still, there is a reason why he was going to eat it, because he knows that from the time that game started, the biggest power in the world isn't money but being strong. In simple words, one's strength is the only thing that matters, so he wants to be the strongest. He has lived his whole life in the home for children with no parents, and on the battlefield, which can be called the darkest place in the world, so he wants to have power that is way more than money, and a world where that is possible is now here. A world where he can really have power that is above everything, and he wants that world. He slowly puts the stone skill in his mouth while saying that he'll make new history, and the system shows that he has changed what will come, so he gets bonus points +1. When he's done eating it, the system tells him that the stealth skill is locked and can't be used, and he can open it at level 10. He is shocked to hear it because he's only level 6, so he needs to get 4 more levels to use stealth, making him say that it's a pain in the ass. One of the players asks him what's wrong, and he says that even if he's strong, he can't have all the fun because of that number that means nothing. Then he looks at his 102 current bonus points, knowing that he needs to go up a level again, so he chooses to use all his bonus points to make his strength bigger. Then his current strength is now 289 +3. He knows that he needs to use stealth when he leaves the dungeon because over 100 players are waiting outside the gate to take that skill from him. Even with his huge strength, fighting 100 players will be too hard, so if there's even one monster left in the dungeon, more monsters will come to match the number it's supposed to have. And as the dungeon will be gone if all the lichens are killed, he'll let one live and chase the ones that come. He also knows that a strength stat of close to 300 is very bad for those level 5 lichens. Even if he just flicks a finger, he has to be careful so he doesn't break all their bones. Also, having speed over 50 helps make it faster. A few minutes later, he goes up a level, so he's now level 10, which lets him use his stealth skill and gets 4 bonus points. Then he right away uses his stealth skill, but only one of his hands becomes transparent, so he asks the players how he's supposed to use that skill when it's like that. The man says that when his skill level goes higher, his clothes will also become transparent, and the higher the level, the more powerful the skill is. Also, the better the type of the skill, the more the skill gets better every time it goes up in level, and stealth is a rare type skill, so when it levels up, it will be very powerful. After hearing it, he thinks all of the skills he has show their level next to the skill name, and asks the players if his clothes will only become transparent when his stealth is at level 2. All the players agree. He takes his clothes off, then uses his stealth power, making him fully invisible. He thinks those players have come there for stealth, which was his in his past life, so if they could, they would have taken his life too. So he doesn't see why he should let them live while the newly come wolf-like beasts were walking in anger toward the players who were asking to be let go because they have told him all they know. But he just tells them to be quiet. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 2 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.